everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the Open World Learning Podcast. I'm Emily Wade.
I'm Adam Brown.
And we're going to focus this week on gamification in education. But before we get to that bit, I shared my story last week. We thought this week would be a great opportunity for Adam to share a little bit of his background and ways that he has gamified different things, particularly in the educational setting. So Adam, would you like to start with that?
Thank you, Em. Yeah, I feel like I should go back and talk about sweeping up in a timber yard for a cash job before I got into the real jobs later on, because you went back and you have such an interesting career trajectory. But I guess I'll skip straight to the teaching. I began teaching in 2005 when I began a PhD in various disciplines, from children's literature to history to literature and media and communication studies, as it was called at the time. So I did all these sort of things as a casual sessional tutor. And I loved it right from the beginning. That was something that I'd sort of always planned to be a teacher. I sort of thought I'd be a primary education teacher and then a secondary education teacher. And then my high school teachers actually told me never to be a high school teacher, which I think that they were underselling themselves. But I sort of got to university and I thought, university teaching seems all right. And I sort of just fell into it. When I went through and started to teach in these areas, it was very traditional kind of teaching. So, I didn't discover the idea of gamification itself until I was full-time for several years. And I wasn't using digital media. I mean, social media just wasn't around in the way that it is now back in 2005. So it was very, very, PowerPoint and Word document kind of things and all that stuff. But as I moved through, there was one theme that really stood out as being a frequently discussed thing, and it was student engagement. We talked a lot about the crises of student engagement, or the crises of engagement generally, and it's not a criticism as such as just saying there's a constant need to renew the strategies for anyone who's trying to engage people in the present. And I really just, this issue was big for me because I wanted to feel I was having an impact. I wanted to make a difference. And I began teaching with digital media, in making digital media units in 2013. I bought a smartphone. I started to learn stuff. After not making a video for a decade or more, I taught myself how to make digital and videos, and I started podcasts, and I got on Twitter, and I started using social media without really knowing that that's inherently gamified, just through the very fact of instant feedback and, the kind of community you build, avatars and everything else that uses some game elements in an intrinsic way. But I'll set that aside because several years into that, it was the end of 2015, early 2016, even though I had discovered something that was really fulfilling. Students seemed to love it. The YouTube videos, you don't want to know how terrible the 2013 YouTube videos were, but I still use those because it shows that progression of learning. I really hit a point where I was seriously considering whether I should keep teaching, because I didn't feel like I was having the impact that I wanted. I wasn't getting the engagement. I wasn't seeing students being as enthused. And I was probably being unfair to everyone involved in that way. But I came across gamification at about the same time. And I thought, I'm trying to build community. I'm trying to get students online and really build their presence and their portfolios and their networks. What can I do? And I was starting this web series with Danielle Teixeira that we talked about. And I thought, I'm doing a web series on gamification. I've never gamified anything. And I don't know. I wish that I could go back and figure out what the point in time was that I thought of it. It was a very, in the shower moment, I guess, in a way. But I told Danielle this, and basically I think it was episode 3 of the web series. I talked to Danielle on camera in conversation, just like we are now. And I was really sort of working it out. It wasn't scripted as I talked. I knew that I wanted to have some kind of point system. I knew what it was going to be called. And in order to get students engaged online and in tweeting and making and sharing media, I decided to develop what became known as the Tiffet system. So all of that is a prelude to talking about what the hell is the Tiffet system. Now, it was named after my Maltese Shih Tzu companion, Tiffany, and Tiffets were points and they were badges, and there was sort of a currency system. It was sort of things that you could even spend points on in some ways, although it was a little bit aesthetic in that sense. So students sort of started off with a certain number of points. It wasn't like you started on 0, which I think was important. And you actually did lose points over time. You spent 10 points every time I released a weekly video. So you could get down to 0 potentially, but you most importantly gained points. And to cut all the details short, on a Google spreadsheet, I was tabulating points manually. I had a lot of people saying, why don't you just automatically do this? Set something up. It doesn't work like that. You can't just get people spamming a hashtag with 20 tweets that are not relevant and somehow get points. It wouldn't even work, much less it wouldn't work practically. So I was doing that 7 days, mostly late at night. It was like, got to 1 or 2 in the morning. It's like, don't talk. The students are sleeping. Don't make any noise. And so I did that. And there were also badges. So you got to a certain threshold points and you got badges for a certain number of Tiffets. With every 100 Tiffets, there were 5 badges. So by the time you got up to 500 points, which I didn't think anyone would actually get to initially, you'd have all the badges, and I would tweet that with the handles of the sort of a batch of students who got there, and they would be tagged. The interesting thing was that, and I've already alluded to the fact that it got massive engagement, the students who were tagged in those badges, those credentials, little mini credentials, that meant nothing, actually really loved it. That public display, it's what I do now. I just give my favorite GIF, and students, seem to respond to that a lot of the time as well. So they were given badges, and that was shared to the hashtag. And you could see that it sounds like it's competitive. I want to get the badges before anyone else. There's a part of that, but there's also, we talked about the interplay between collaboration and competition. And I saw the generous responses from other students saying, well done, really great. That's really motivated me to do more. And even those intrinsically motivated students who sort of say, oh, I don't really need this stuff, I think they were so motivated because, you're motivated because other people around you are motivated. So it motivates you even more. So that was another thing. I had the unlockable content. So there were videos you didn't need for assessment or anything like that. I think there were 3 in the first trimester, bonus levels, I called them. And they were like little things. Like one was around video thumbnails. One was around, it was actually around Vine, which disappeared a year or 2 later. So there was just little extra learning that you didn't have to get, but you felt like you won something, sort of like the Easter egg, you unlocked something. So it had point system, badges, unlockable content. There was mystery in some ways. I had various other elements that kind of came in part because of the students. I'll give one anecdote around this, that a group of students in one of my evening seminars, it was a relatively small seminar, there were only about 8 students, and they all regularly showed up. They came up with the idea, in order to spur on more engagement, they would donate their Tiffets to a little media making challenge and then award someone with that. So someone else would get some Tiffets. Now, remember, these points don't equate directly and barely even tangentially to a mark at this stage. And it was just such a nice gesture. Now, obviously, if they gave 100 Tiffets of their own each to this project, I was going to give them 100 or 200, whatever. I was going to reward them and they wouldn't lose anything. But it was just that gesture, and that was the one little moment that stayed with me. There were lots of moments. I mean, I actually had to create another badge for the 1,000 Tiffet mark, because by week 6 out of 11 or 12, the students had hit that 5th badge, and they're like, what's next? I'm like, well, keep going. A lot of students realized they didn't need it, but they still, I did one badge for the 1,000, and that was a video badge, and a student called it the golden Tiffet with Willy Wonka connotations, and that was sort of became the next thing that people would go for, and that really spurred on a lot of people to try and get that as well. So it wasn't universally effective, but I've used the word unprecedented in the kind of difference that it made. And I learned a lot from that system, even though I was doing that for around, if not quite 200 students maybe 250. Now that I'm teaching units of similar kind of type with sizes between 500 and 600 students, it's literally not physically possible. I really put myself through it to implement that system. So I've still learned a lot from that system, and there were probably other elements of it. And there's lots of media I've made around it, sort of what it taught me. I still use it, even though there's no longer TIFFs, and I'm still trying to work out ways that I can bring TIFFs back, but it will have to be in a different form, and it will be in a better form because I've learned from the students just by doing it. And that structural system had to be changed. We went through that thing that you can't maintain people's motivation. It had to grow. It had to change. And every trimester it was different in little ways or potentially big ways, because things get stale and bland pretty quickly. So that's a long-winded kind of story. I probably didn't say too much of the story, but I think that that's more pertinent to the kind of topic that we're looking at is gamification and education. And there are lots of ways you can do it. Danielle was using a content-based gamification system where she spent dozens and dozens of hours and resources making a sort of a narrative called The Story of Hemp, which was interactive, and that was content-based. I use structural gamification. I've used content with Twine, which I'll talk about another time. But you've also used structural gamification with something you discovered and used far more early and much more generally than me, which is Kahoot.
Yeah, that's right. Kahoot was something that I started using probably a couple of years ago now. And before I actually got to using Kahoot, I had trialed a number of other sort of online quiz makers and trialed them with classes as well, asking for feedback when I did that. But I actually found that the way that Kahoot is designed, it's number one, something that a lot of students were already familiar with. So they've been used to this idea of doing quizzes in class throughout their schooling, not just in higher education. And the way that it's set up with all sorts of different elements. So when the quiz is on the screen and there's a time limit, there's obviously not just the desire to get the right answer, but you've got to do it within a certain time. And there's different elements such as music and graphics, and obviously the podium at the end that recognises those that have placed the highest. But it is naturally something that can help reinforce key learning. So it's a fun way to reinforce key things that we have covered throughout that seminar or throughout the last few weeks. And it's something that I think we touched on in earlier episodes about the desire for many of us to enjoy play. A lot of us do enjoy that, even though it's something that is typically associated with kids. This idea of playing, but it's something that is carried with us into our adult lives, and maybe some of us just don't explore that as much as we could. So that idea of everybody in the classroom competing and participating in the same sort of interactive quiz with immediate feedback, and the idea that everybody gets points at the end as well. So there's points awarded for every question. As a person who sets up the quiz, you can actually control how many points are awarded within a certain set of templates. And the whole energy changes in the classroom when we do one of those. Sometimes it can even prompt further discussion after that. If there was a question that confused some people, or they didn't expect, or maybe two answers that were a little bit ambiguous, they can be really good learning opportunities too. But the collective ability to sort of have some fun, it's got the hands-on component too, because students play using their smartphones. So they're looking at the screen, but they're actually interacting on their personal devices. All of those things come together to enhance learning, engagement, and just add a little bit of fun to the classroom.
One of the things that really resonates with me thinking about that system and the TIFFs system and what your students do once those sort of, you know, it's like the gold and silver and bronze, isn't it? That they take photos or you share a screenshot to the hashtag, and the students get a lot of joy in that that status. And you see the students every now and then saying, I love coming forth, which is sort of, it's ironic, that they don't really mind, but there is a gratification to that. And it really, as you say, it changes the mood, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And that's right. I think those things work really well when you do have that follow-up ability to connect with students in the online community and share those victories, but also encourage everyone else along the way. It's a really nice way. Again, it's something that I'm conscious of not doing every seminar. I certainly wouldn't make it a weekly thing, because as with anything, any form of gamification or any sort of educational technique, if it's done the same way every single week, then it does start to lose its shine. So used well and at good intervals, it's certainly really, really effective.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that exact same thing, actually. And in another way, because Kahoot is becoming more well-known now, and that students have quite often had it in high school, and that might create a nice connection between high school and university when they come between the different systems there. But that more and more teachers are doing Kahoot now as well. So I guess the nature of innovation is, I imagine the back of your mind is like, what else can I do?
That's right. That's exactly right. And I think I was probably really conscious of that when I first started exploring different online quiz makers. And it was actually a student who suggested to me first, why don't you use Kahoot? And I said, when they first suggested that, I said, oh, really? Is that something you would be happy to play? It's sort of something I just naturally associated with younger students, with children. But they said, no, that's great fun. We've got other lecturers, other teachers that use it, and it always works really well. So that's what first spurred me on to try it. But I suppose one way that I've tried to develop my use of Kahoot, and as I said, not doing it every week is part of that, but also making sure I'm designing really good, meaningful questions. It can take a bit of time to put together a really good Kahoot when you've got really trying to draw out key themes from the unit materials. And I know that some people use it for a bit of fun, just use the general knowledge or themed Kahoots that are already set up on the site, and they can be shared between educators. But for me, if it's not unit related, yes, it's a bit of fun, but it's not really harnessing that play element to enhance learning. So those are a few personal goals I have in the way I use it, good questions and making sure it is unit related. But beyond that, I suppose we've got to keep pushing the boundaries with the ways we can innovate, which is a challenge.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I was just thinking that at the start and the end of a particular subject or trimester, the kind of the fun general knowledge, it can work sort of, as a bit of an entertaining thing. But if you did that when you're doing substantive topics, there's that risk that you're going to make it look like, at least be perceived by students as you're just trying to liven things up instead of actually enhance the learning. So integrating the learning outcomes into that and the knowledge and skill development is a really important thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's probably something that has to be kept in mind with all of the different contexts for gamification that we talk about. Understanding the audience, understanding the context and the purpose is so important. And gamification has amazing possibilities, but it comes down to good design. So using these things well is really a huge part of whether they're successful or not.
Yeah. The last thing that I thought that I'd add is that, all of this, it seems so straightforward. I remember years ago when I probably read or watched something about gamification, it's a tragedy that we forget that once we get past a certain age, that play isn't absolutely fundamental to learning, or it can be. And that's why gamification has really taken off in this area, because it's not just for young kids, which obviously from the moment you're born, they say that play is so absolutely crucial, but it follows through all of life. And gamification is there in education in a lot of different ways. Our education system that we both work with is inherently gamified. Students have to grab a bunch of credits or points. At Deakin, we actually call them credit points, just to really labor the point that it's gamified in an implicit way. And you get towards a final credential or degree when you graduate. That credential is a sort of a badge. Now, and there's other sort of gamified progress bars that universities will bring in, and that's changed over time. That hasn't always been there, which is important for current students to understand too. But to me, it's that kind of gamification, which you see everywhere. It's been around forever, the idea of credits and degrees. That's not likely going to change. I mean, we've got micro-credentials talked about a lot these days. That's the most boring, mundane form of gamification in education that I could possibly think of. So we've talked about the Tiffet system and we've talked about Kahoot. There are really, in-depth, immersive, interactive learning environments that have been developed as well in different educational contexts. So there's lots to explore. I'm sure that we'll come back to education in different settings.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's plenty more we can think of to talk about, but we'll keep this short enough.
Thanks very much for joining us. I'm Adam Brown. You can find me as Digital Zones on Twitter.
And I'm Emily Wade, and you can find me as Emily at Deakin on Twitter.
Feel free to leave us a comment, question, any feedback you like. Do feel free to subscribe, and we really look forward to chatting to you again. Bye for now.
Bye.